So welcome everybody to the latest episode of the Deconstructing SBIR from DHS S&T. This is the 21.1 Pre-Solicitation. It's become kind of a tradition now that we do a Deconstructing SBIR when we have our pre-solicitation out. And the goal of the program, especially on this episode, is to make sure you're prepared for how you're going to be submitting and understand the SBIR program and process. I'm very excited today because I'm being joined by Jen Greenwood from NAVSEA. So welcome, Jen. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. So for folks that are not necessarily familiar with NAVSEA or your particular organization, can you talk a little bit about your job, your role there at NAVSEA, and sort of what the scope of your organization is?
So I work for NAVSEA, which is one of the Navy syscoms, the big system commands that develop all of the ships and airplanes and stuff like that. We have NAVSEA, NAVAIR, there's a couple others that do strategic systems and different syscoms throughout the Navy. I work in what's called the Program Executive Office for the Unmanned and Small Combatant. So we have several divisions throughout NAVSEA, different program executive office that develop different product lines throughout the Navy. So we have the integrated warfare systems. They develop all of the warfare systems for the Navy. We have PEO ships that develops all of the large ships. PEO sub does all the PEO or does all the submarine work. PEO carriers obviously does aircraft carriers. In my PEO, which is unmanned and small combatants, we're kind of a mishmash of a bunch of different things. We do, we used to be the littoral combat ship. However, that really wasn't descriptive of our product line because we do littoral combat ship. We do mine warfare. We have all of the unmanned underwater and unmanned surface vehicles for the Navy. We've also brought on a couple more program offices for expeditionary MCM and kind of some special warfare, different things. So we have a very diverse product line within PEO USC.
Great. Thank you so much. It's amazing, yeah, the whole unmanned thing becomes so, kind of organization and need. So thank you for that overview. So for the folks just not becoming familiar with SBIR or learning about SBIR, it's a three-phase program where the federal government works with small businesses as defined by 500 employees or less to develop innovative technology to help feed the needs for federal government. And some of the other previous webinars, which you can check out on the DHS Science and Technology Directorate YouTube page, we've gone into more detail about the program, but we have a lot to talk about today. And one of them is, of course, that we're both in a pre-release period for our upcoming solicitations. So the good news is you can find out about the program by reading our pre-release and our pre-solicitations. Ours is in pre-solicitation, and Jen can talk about hers a little bit here in a second, what pre-release means. But the generally talking about sort of the schedule for events, we're looking at ending the pre-solicitation for DHS on December 10th. So right now, folks can ask questions and they'll get direct answers, so they don't have to go live. But making sure that you're aware, look at the topics and go read the solicitation. And if you have questions, and we're going to show something at the end that tells how to get there, make sure you're asking those questions while you have the opportunity. So there's going to be 12 topics coming from DHS. They're going to be showing them right now. There's 12 on the list here. There's a red line that shows that the ones above are ones collected by Science and Technology Directorate, and the ones below are collected by CWD. The thing that's important to know is, well, there's two things. all of these serve the entirety of DHS. So they're going to be, you'll see topics that help with the Coast Guard needs, some with TSA, some with CISA for cyber security and infrastructure security. They're going to run the gambit. The only difference is that CWMD kind of administers their own program. So those last two topics have subtle different requirements, and make sure that if you're looking at those two, that you understand what the difference is in the requirements in the solicitation. I know that, Jen, you have, like you said, or like I said, the topics in pre-release. Can you talk about that and then kind of talk about the topics that you guys have out right now?
Sure. Our pre-release just opened yesterday, so we're just getting kind of started with pre-release. And right now we're in kind of a special pre-release for the Navy. The DoD will actually do their pre-release on the 8th. So our pre-release is going to run from now until the 8th of January, I believe. And I have those dates on a slide in here for sure. But yeah, our pre-release is going to run kind of just getting started. During this time, we highly encourage you to call the topic authors who are listed on each topic so that you can have that conversation with them regarding kind of some of the details of the different topics. But we have, the Navy has, I believe, over 100 SBIR and STTRs that they're putting out Navy-wide. Of that, roughly half of it goes to NAVSEA. So we have 50 topics, over 50 topics in the BAA that's in pre-release. PEO USC, we have 9 SBIRs that are listed there and 1 STTR. That one on the bottom is STTR. That's going to require a 30% research partner component. So 30% of the work must be going to a research partner. But we have topics kind of running the gamut of PEO USC business lines. We have some unmanned systems, which are addressing navigation. There's an unmanned anchor handling system so that we can anchor unmanned systems, like the different things you start thinking about when you get into unmanned systems and all the different needs they have. We need an anchor. So we have some cybersecurity. There's an energy optimization topic in there. So we kind of are running the gamut. We also have 5 topics focused on MCM and expeditionary MCM, and we have 1 comms topic. Usually we have a little more on the comms side, but this year we only have about one comms topic that we're putting out.
Great. So I think a couple things to talk about. I've gotten a couple questions from industry already in our pre-solicitation about asking about STTR. So the threshold for whether an agency has an STTR program is different than an SBIR. It's a higher level of extramural R&D. And so clearly the Navy at that level has that funding threshold. DHS does not, so we do not have any STTR topics. So for the folks that may have asked the question or were wondering, can we submit an STTR? We don't have those topics, but I'm glad to see that you do, because I think the other thing that I find very interesting is looking at this. I think it's sort of expected that there would be a good amount of overlap between, for instance, the Coast Guard and NAVSEA in terms of topics and needs and requirements. But I think once you start looking at the topics from the 2 different solicitations, you'll find even more overlap. So we always like to make sure that we're doing our best to do outreach and partnering that can facilitate the leveraging of those technology developments across the federal agency. So,
and just
yeah.
sorry, I didn't. Just
no,
because DHS doesn't have an STTR program officially doesn't mean you can't do some more researchy things with your topics. So
right.
If there's a company out there that wants to really kind of push the envelope as far as innovation goes, they can partner with that research institution and kind of get more of that cutting edge technology.
They absolutely can, and it is something I've talked about in other deconstructing, is that when we do our evaluations of those submissions, I like to encourage the evaluation teams to look at this from the perspective and the way that the criteria is structured, which you can find in the pre-solicitation. It does give us some ability on that first highest criteria, the technical merit, to say, okay, there's the feasibility, and then there's this piece on innovation and what are we looking at here. If this is something that is a highly innovative topic and therefore may require a little bit more time to get to full fruition, then let's consider if it would make that big impact or leap in technology or development that may be worth that risk. So it's certainly something that we do look at from the phase 1 evaluation perspective. And so thank you. Yes. and there's nothing that, the only thing that precludes them from they can certainly partner with a research institution. There's just the requirement that 66% of the, or 2/3 of the effort needs to be conducted by the small business in the phase one. So it's a little bit different for the SBIR versus STTR, but absolutely they can partner with a research institution. So good point, thank you. So I want to, we're not going to go all the way into the whole evaluation process, but I do want to kind of concentrate a little bit on some of the requirements for a proposal submission. So for instance, we're changing our, historically we've had 6-month period of performance for a phase one, which is pretty common across the federal agencies for a phase one. I know the Air Force has done some shorter ones recently. We're actually going to take ours down to a 5-month period of performance at a $150,000 threshold. And, you know, there's other things like the technical proposal portion of the submission is limited to 20 pages. Do you want to talk about some of the thresholds and structures that may be different for the NAVSEA submissions?
Sure, we do things similar but a little different. We have our phase one base is 6 months and it's $140,000 for that 6-month base. But we also do an option, a phase one option on that, and only the companies that are selected for phase two will get the 100K 6-month phase one option. So we do kind of at that that evaluation point when we select when we award a 100K option. So it's pretty standard. It's a 6 months option, and then hopefully we're trying to get you right into that phase two. So there's not, we're minimizing unfunded time, I think is kind of the goal there, is to minimize that unfunded time for the small business and to keep you guys kind of moving for a while. Our phase two contract structures are going to vary. The threshold for phase two is up to $1.7 million for NAVSEA. And we can mix and match that structure to be whatever somebody needs it to be, whatever fits the effort, we can tailor that structure to kind of follow that.
That's great. And I definitely want to steal this option idea for the phase one. We're looking into how we may be able to implement. So that's not yet something, but I'm interested in looking into that. And the other thing, like you mentioned, the companies that are selected to pursue the phase two are the ones that receive that phase one option. And when we chatted earlier, neither of us are currently doing a direct to phase two. I know that the DoD, you guys have the authority to do that. DHS does not. It's in the legislation. That there are 3 organizations that are given that ability, and of course DoD is one of them, and we are not. But given that these are not direct to phase two topics, in order to be eligible for the phase two, you have to have been an awardee for the phase one. So it's and for DHS, it's a 24-month period of performance and $1 million. To be able to get to that point it's important folks know, don't wait for that. Get in now, because that's the path to eligibility.
And there may be some direct to phase two and some other different SBIR pilot programs in the BAA. I'm not sure if we're doing anything kind of special this time, but the Navy has been doing a lot of SBIR re-engineering programs, and so they've done some accelerators and some direct to phase twos. So definitely keep an eye out for those options, because they may be in the BAA. I'm just not aware of those.
Thank you. Yeah. So we're speaking only about our portions, but yes, and it's another reason to make sure you're checking out the actual documentation. We're here to help spread the word and provide some information, but the solicitation and the documentation is the authority. So I think we've both been in the scenario in the past where, you know, we put out the solicitations, we tell people what the thresholds, we talk about them in many events, and you know, kind of do outreach about it. But despite that, occasionally folks won't listen or put submissions in that aren't in alignment with the thresholds or the rules of the pre-solicitation or solicitation. So I know that we just a couple of years ago were trying to make things a little bit clearer related to the SBA certification. And we ended up apparently making it a little bit more confusing, and ended up having to have some folks that their proposals could not be evaluated, even though they'd been submitted. Are there, do you want to talk about how NAVSEA handles proposals that don't follow the submission instructions?
So submission instructions, you have to, there's a certain page limit. If you're over the page limit, your proposal is going to get disqualified. Due dates, if you're late, the due dates are firm because it is a competitive source selection process. And we want to make sure that that's kept fair for everyone across the board. So we have that submission deadline, and it is a hard and fast date, and we will not accept late submissions to keep it fair for everyone across the board. And the contracts are firm fixed price. So if you're proposing something that is $160,000 on a phase one, we're probably going to have to disqualify that proposal because it's overpriced on a firm fixed price. We can't really do much with that. I will caution you though, we have had a couple in the past who have proposed way under that mark as well. And so if you're under proposing, it's not a best value contract. So you're not winning any points if you are proposing to do the work for 100K. So make sure that you're coming up to that mark so that you're getting the full amount of money that you should be getting throughout the SBIR. That's
an excellent point as well. You're doing a great job of making sure you get those points out there. It's because I'll agree. I've talked about this before, and yeah, so there's no advantage. You're not given a, hey, you proposed less. That's not one of the criteria. We only do a look at it and make sure that it meets the requirements. But, and I've had topic managers or evaluators before say, well, everybody's proposing at that 149.99. I'm like, well, the benefit of this is they're trying to make sure that they're doing everything they can to all the resources that they're able to prove feasibility. They're trying to make the most of that opportunity. I don't see that as a bad thing. But I will also caution, like you said, going over is not good. And I've had folks in the past come up and say, hey, well, we weren't that far over. It's like, yeah, but if we allow a little bit over, then, well, where do we draw that line? And it becomes pretty muddy, in my opinion. And then we just end up with, well, where do we stop? And it's like, well, we might as well just stop at what we advertised at as the limit. So so definitely heed Jen's advice. Don't look at it as a proposing less. Make sure you're making the most of the opportunity. And using all that resource that's available.
I will just add one more thing. If you're proposing TABA or technical and business assistance, you can go over that mark, the TABA amount, which I think for the Navy on a phase one is $5,000. So if you're proposing that TABA, and you have to have that approved by ONR, so that's just not money in your pocket. Make sure that you can go over that mark, but that is the only circumstance where you can go $5,000 over the ceiling total.
Right. And for DHS, they have to make that very, very clear which port is the TABA. And it is not, they shouldn't be meshing that into the threshold for the proposal. It should be very clear what that is, because if it's not, then it may end up in them being considered proposing over. And it's a separate approval process, like you were saying, is that it's not money in their pocket. There's rules related to that. And those are we point back to the SBA for how to follow the rules for TABA to a great extent. But yeah, you still need to justify that, and it's not, you don't just get to say, hey, we also want that money. They have to put in there what they're doing to that it falls within the TABA guidelines. So yep. In terms of, so those are a lot of procedural type things, or almost like check the box. Okay, I'm making sure that I have, SBA certification complete. I'm within thresholds. I'm not, a page over or a penny over, that kind of thing. But then there's also making sure that you're addressing the needs, kind of the goal of the effort, which I think is important. And want to talk a little bit about how companies can try to make sure that they're able to do that. And I would love for some thoughts from you on what you see as best practices and that sort of thing for the small businesses.
So I think it's best when we get proposals in that are just hitting the topic head on. Like, don't try and tap dance around it. Don't use ambiguous terms, you know, hit it head on. There's a limited amount of real estate in a proposal. So you want to make sure that you're succinct and you're addressing exactly what the topic is asking for. I can't count how many times I get evaluators who are saying they have a really good idea, but it doesn't match, or it's not, you know, succinct, and they don't. So make sure you're clearly articulating your technical approach and how it addresses the topic. Draw that conclusion all the way through so that there's no question in the evaluator's mind exactly what we're trying to do. Be mindful of size, weight, and power. SWAP considerations are really, really important, especially in the Navy, and, you know, some of those NAVAIR topics that are going to be, you know, going on planes. If we're keeping you to a certain size and weight constraint, it's because there's limited space and limited weight. On a ship, there's also limited power. So you want to make sure that you're looking at those considerations very seriously. And as I said before, it's not a best value contract. So don't try and give us a great bargain, because you're probably shorting yourself in the end. Actually, you're definitely shorting yourself in the end. So another one pitfall is if the topic is asking for low cost solutions, or we have a lot of, in the past, we don't have one in this call, but we've done a lot of low cost expendable solutions, something that we're gonna, you know, throw out in the ocean and leave there. Low cost is gonna be subjective. So I would, if I see something that says low cost, I would call up the topic author and be like, what does low cost mean in this situation? How much do I have to bring that price down to make it fit the Navy's needs?
That's certainly an excellent, I mean, from my perspective, I know I've always tried to push back to topic authors saying, hey, we have to define those kinds of things. But occasionally those types of things do kind of get through the process, and it's an excellent, just because we haven't articulated it doesn't mean that we didn't sort of miss an opportunity to provide some clarifying details or you know, the information that's needed from industry. So I always recommend, yeah, read through the topic, don't ask questions that are in the topic, and look at the references. Make sure you've reviewed those references, because we pay attention to those too. Make sure that they're publicly available, that kind of thing. But if you don't see it, this is an opportunity for us to be able to better articulate the topic to industry, and it's important to do. And I also like some of the other things you mentioned related to make sure you understand the need, and want to kind of, I guess, go down the path of the, we have the opportunities for talking to the topic authors or to the subject matter experts. NAVSEA has done a great job in that for the past 6 years, they've held an annual topic workshop event where the topics are kind of just talked about for industry. Can you talk about, I know you've been involved with that. Can you talk more about what that event is like?
Yeah, we have the topic workshop every year after the pre-release comes out. Typically it's an in-person event, and then there are satellite sites that the event gets broadcast out to. NAVSEA sends representatives to all of those satellite sites. So hopefully next year we'll be back in person. This year we're, you know, obviously in a virtual environment, so we don't have that one-on-one contact that we would generally like. But we're following the same model. We're doing the topic presentations, and then we're going to meet one-on-one with some small businesses on the 3rd, I believe, is when those are happening. Then the next week, there's also an event on the West Coast in New Mexico. Once again, it's the same kind of setup where we would normally travel to New Mexico and some satellite sites and present the topics and meet with small businesses. However, once again, that's not possible. So we're doing them virtually this year, but they're really great events. I strongly encourage, if you can dial into one virtually, or, you know, next year virtually, this year or in person, or however, next year in person, this year virtually, however you want to do that. I strongly encourage it. I think it's a great networking event, even if, because most of the companies have read the topics, they already know what's in there. But it's a great networking event. There's a lot of, sometimes there's some primes that go. I know the Boston event, Lockheed and Raytheon are heavily attending those. So it's a great opportunity for small businesses to just get that outreach, to get that networking done, and meet some folks and possibly make some really valuable business contacts.
Yes, I was super excited, and we actually kind of included the information. So we have an ability on the DHS SBIR page to sign up for a listserv. So we had given that as part of the email we sent out for the pre-solicitation, that we were very happy to be partnering with NAVSEA on that this year. I've been eager to try to do that for the last couple of years, but due to some other mitigating circumstances, we weren't able to do it, but very happy to be partnering this year. And we learned right before we went out with this event, this webinar, that it's actually hit the full limit. So make sure that you're looking for those opportunities for the folks at that are interested in DHS SBIR. Please make sure that if you're interested in getting as much information as possible, that you sign up for our listserv, and we're going to be putting up some slides in a minute here or so that show how to get to different things. But one more thing is, I want to make sure folks don't feel like, even though they may not be able to attend this event that we were just talking about, like you said, Jen, there's other events to make sure they're looking out for. But in the circumstances where they're not able to attend these events, that doesn't preclude kind of everything we've said thus far related to being able to contact folks. So kind of reiterating one more time the ability to reach out, because it's important to ask questions. If we can go to the slide with the schedules, we can chat about the opportunities for folks to reach out. Did you want to talk about some of the dates that are important for folks to be aware of?
Yeah, right now we're in the Navy preview only, like I discussed kind of previously, which is still kind of a pre-release. You can still contact those topic authors and get some good information from them. December 8th is the official DoD pre-release. That's when the rest of the DoD topics are going to come out. And then the solicitation portal opens on January 14th for proposal submission and closes on February 18th. So that's kind of our timeline. I strongly encourage people to contact those topic authors. Please keep in mind that they do have full-time jobs. They are very, very busy folks. So if they don't get back to you, in a day or so, please don't despair. They will get back to you. They're just, they have a lot of different things going on right now. So just be patient with them. Keep trying.
Yes.
Be patient with them.
Yes, absolutely. So yes, because yes, we have the same challenges. So our pre-solicitation, like I mentioned, is closing December 10th. We did it a little bit different this year. We went out with more information on our pre-solicitation. Typically at DHS, we've gone out with just mostly the topics, but we provided more information about the entirety of what will be in the solicitation as it comes out. I would caution you, please look at the solicitation though when it comes out, because the dates below that are in the solicitation, but they are listed as estimated because they aren't necessarily what we will go forward with, but it's what we're intending at this point. But so we're hoping that solicitation opens on the 11th, and the target right now for the close is January 15th. I think Jen would echo the fact that although we have the times up there for when the solicitation closes, and we cannot accept them past that date because of the competitive regulations, we don't recommend you look at that as the target for when you're submitting. If something goes wrong, if your computer glitches like mine loves to do when something important is due immediately, and without fail, it will decide, oh, you know what, you don't need to do any work right now. So do not wait till that end point. Unfortunately, if something happens at 12:50 with your computer and you can't get it submitted, we aren't going to be able to make an exception for you to be able to submit later. So please submit early. Don't wait till the last minute.
I recommend 3 days to everybody who asks. 3 days. Give it 3 days.
And our system does, if all of a sudden 3 days before you realize, oh, we made a mistake, which is another reason to do this. It's like, oh, we uploaded the wrong one, or we're doing our sanity check and we missed something and you need to make a fix. That's still possible 3 days before. It is not possible 3 days after, or 3 minutes after, or 3 seconds after. So yes, 3 days is a good rule. And trust me, I am a procrastinator, so I understand how this happens, because you want to make sure you're getting all your things done. So yes, 3 days is a good rule. So we're going to look at some of the questions that we got from the audience real quick here. We don't have a lot of time, but I want to try to answer just a couple of them, Jen, if we can try to fit some in. So let me scroll up. I saw some good ones coming through. So one of the questions is, how does commercialization weigh into the evaluation process? And I think this kind of speaks to understanding the operational needs. So if you're reading a topic and you don't understand the operational environment or need, do you want to talk about how that weighs into the process for NAVSEA?
So obviously we have 3 different criteria. We have the technical approach, the strength of your facilities and personnel to accomplish the work, and commercialization. The technical approach is weighted the most heavily. We don't ding folks for not having commercialized any technology, but we will, if you don't have a plan, please have a plan to commercialize your technology. Have something that you've put some thought into on how you plan to commercialize. I will say there are some topics that there's really not a lot of commercialization there. But in the DoD, there are, some defense-related specific topics that may not allow you to commercialize as much because the primary customer is going to be the DoD. But for the most part, have a well-thought-out plan for commercialization.
And the distinction there, just for folks that don't have as much experience with federal government, is what we traditionally call it a transition. And maybe you guys use the same term. So within DHS, we call it transition when it's something intended to be used by DHS, and we end up purchasing it or acquiring product or service for that product. But then when the commercialization means that it's going out to industry. So it may be trickier, like you're saying, for a DoD type effort to go to industry, right?
Those are rare. Those topics are really rare. They do come up every now and then where we're like, I don't really think there's a commercialization for this. There's not a commercial path for this technology. And it happens, unfortunately. But we try to make sure that commercialization capability is there.
And if there's not a commercial or industry kind of solution or path or less clear path, then they still have to talk about how they're going to get to TRL 9, meaning that it still have to go through how they plan on getting that to a place where it can be used and is a functional product, and how they see that path. So great. So I did, there was another one so this is, I think, important related to understanding, just because you worked with one federal agency, and I think we've done a good job of sort of kind of showing examples of how there's a difference between DHS and Navy NAVSEA. But somebody asked, what are the stages of review, and is feedback documented? NIH process has a 2-stage review and a 3-person review summary. So to be clear, NIH has a very different process, and I believe they're a granting agency, I'm pretty sure they are, which has a very, well, at least for SBIR, that has a very, very different path in terms of like FAR and other things, and how that works. So for DHS, and I'm pretty sure it's similar for the Navy still, it's, you submit and we do a review, and then at the end of the review, we let you know whether or not you've been selected. If you haven't been selected, you can ask for feedback. Is that similar, Jen, for Navy still?
Yeah, if you're selected, if you're not selected, you can still ask for a debrief from the contracting officer. You're not going to get a huge in-depth document telling you everything that you did wrong. You'll probably get, a paragraph, 5 sentences kind of saying where you had some weakness and where you had some strength, because sometimes these evaluators, in order to get SBIR contracts awarded quickly, we have, a certain amount of time to evaluate 50 or 60 proposals. So they don't have a lot of time to give you a really in-depth, insight into why you weren't selected or why you were selected. But we do the best we can, and we try to get, a strong, paragraph or 2 letting you know, giving you some tips for feedback.
And we definitely look through those and make sure that there's something of substance, and that we're making sure that I mean, the evaluation process is solid, but we also want to make sure that we're documenting, and for the benefit of the small businesses, many times making sure that this actually articulates some of the areas where there was weakness. And the benefit of this is I always recommend folks ask for the feedback. We spend a lot of work and time getting that documented anyway. You know where there was some weaknesses, and sometimes you may be reading and saying, well, no, we would have done that, or we would have whatever. Well, then there was a communication challenge there, and how you were articulating that, and that's something to be aware of either way. For feedback for the companies that have received or pursuing award, then certainly you have that opportunity in the kickoff, and I would use that opportunity, even recommend that even more than just asking for the feedback. If you're selected to pursue award, is ask them about that in the kickoff. We can't change what you've proposed, but if sometimes there's room within what the proposal is to pursue an avenue for mitigating whatever risks or weaknesses they may have seemed to identified, and certainly it's something to think about going forward for potential phase 2 as well. So knowing that at the phase 1, you can kind of direct where you think you're going to go for the phase 2. So unfortunately,
oh, sorry. If you're
no, go ahead.
Don't give up. If you're not selected, don't give up. Keep trying, because only about 3 to 10% of the proposals are selected for each topic. Maybe a little higher depending, but keep trying. So it's very competitive. So keep trying, stick with it, and hopefully eventually you'll get an award. So yes, it does take some time.
Eventually we'll get an opportunity to work together, hopefully, yes. So thank you so much, Jen. I appreciate, we have some links and to be able to show you on how to get to us. So this is, of course, the upcoming event that has been full. So certainly looking forward to participating in that, because it's apparently as attractive to folks as I think it should be to attend. There's the SBIR, the DHS SBIR link, and the stsbir.program@hq.dhs.gov. So if you have additional questions that you've come up with since then, make sure that you email us. I want to real quickly ask Jen if she has any final thoughts before I wrap up.
I don't. Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to maybe get some DHS companies coming over to NAVSEA. That would be awesome.
Great. We'd love to share. So again, can't stress this enough. Read the entire solicitation, read the topics. If from there you have questions, we very much welcome you to ask us. Sometimes I'll get questions like, when does the pre-solicitation close? Okay, if you're not reading that part of the solicitation, then you're missing a whole bunch of other things. So make sure you're reading all of that, but if there's not information that's not included in there, or if it's included and there's confusion, or you have still questions, please contact us prior to submission rather than trying to sort it out after. So thank you everybody for joining us. We look forward to receiving innovative proposals so that we can pursue some technology development to help both the NAVSEA and DHS missions. We will see you next time on the next Deconstructing SBIR. Have a great day, everybody.